Black girl was punched in the stomach by Mafia boss. Then she took his business down. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Maya Williams wasn't someone you'd expect to be caught up in the mafia world. On the outside, she was just a quiet woman, working as a cashier at a small cafe, trying to live a normal life. But beneath her calm exterior, Maya had a sharp mind and a set of skills that she kept hidden from the world. She had moved from one town to another, always looking for a fresh start, a place where she could blend in. But that all changed the moment she walked into the cafe on that fateful day. Tony Russo, the mafia boss, entered the cafe with his usual entourage. He was a towering figure, known for his ruthless ways, and when he walked in, people immediately recognized him. Maya had never crossed paths with him before, but she had heard the rumors, stories of his wealth, his connections, and his violent temper. But as soon as he stepped up to the counter, something in her gut told her that this was not going to be a normal day. Tony approached the counter with a smirk, his eyes scanning the room as if he owned the place. He placed his order, barely acknowledging Maya's presence. She took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. But then, without warning, Tony made a cruel remark about her appearance, something designed to belittle her, to show that he was in control. Maya didn't flinch. She had been through worse, and she wasn't going to let his words get to her. But the next thing she knew, Tony's fist was in her stomach, knocking the air out of her lungs. The pain was sharp, but Maya didn't collapse. She stood there, straightening up, not letting him see the hurt in her eyes. The room fell silent. Tony's men looked at him in surprise, unsure of what to do next. But Maya wasn't about to let this slide. She had a plan. A secret plan. You see, Maya wasn't just a cashier. She had been gathering information for months. She had been watching Tony's business from the inside, picking up pieces of the puzzle that no one else could see. While Tony thought he could intimidate her with his violence, he didn't realize that Maya was already 5 steps ahead of him. She had the evidence, the proof, the information that could take his empire down. Maya didn't react to the punch. Instead, she quietly walked to the back of the cafe, her mind racing. She had to act fast. Tony was powerful, but Maya was smart. And she had something he didn't. The truth. She spent the next few days working in the shadows, quietly leaking the information she had gathered. She made sure it reached the right people, the ones who could expose Tony for who he really was. And soon, the whispers started to grow louder. The authorities were getting involved. Tony's empire, built on fear and manipulation, began to crumble. The walls that had once protected him were now closing in. Maya didn't need to fight him physically. Her weapon was knowledge, and with it, she tore down everything he had built. As the investigation unfolded, Tony found himself powerless for the first time in his life. The man who had once ruled with an iron fist was now trapped, his secrets exposed for all to see. And Maya? She walked away, her head held high. She had taken down the mafia boss, not with fists, but with intellect and courage. Her story would be remembered, not as a victim's tale, but as one of triumph, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't violence, but the truth. As Maya walked through the dimly lit backroom of the cafe, her mind was already working on the next steps. She had been careful, meticulous in gathering the pieces of Tony's empire, and now it was time to act. She had not expected the punch, but she also hadn't expected to be underestimated so thoroughly. Tony thought he could break her with a simple act of violence, but in truth, he had only made her resolve stronger. The pain in her stomach faded as she focused on the task at hand. The information she had was crucial, and she knew exactly how to use it. She made her way to the small office at the back, where she pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. The mafia boss was going to regret underestimating her. In the days that followed, Maya's strategy began to unfold. She reached out to a few trusted allies, people who had connections in the right places. She had learned long ago how to blend in, how to be invisible when necessary. But when she needed to, she knew how to make the right people notice. Her network was small, but it was effective. She sent off encrypted emails to a journalist she knew well, one who had a reputation for exposing corruption. The file she attached contained enough evidence to ruin Tony Russo's entire operation, from shady financial dealings to his illegal connections. Maya wasn't just dealing with a mafia boss. She was dismantling a well-oiled machine. For years, Tony had ruled with an iron fist, using fear as his weapon. But Maya understood something that Tony didn't. Knowledge was power, and the truth, when it came out, was unstoppable. She had spent weeks gathering intel, piecing together transactions, legal loopholes, and under-the-table deals. Tony had been careless, thinking his empire was untouchable. He didn't realize that Maya had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to strike. The following week, the first cracks in Tony's empire began to show. News outlets started to pick up on the stories she had planted, small whispers of corruption, rumors of a powerful businessman who had been hiding his dirty secrets. At first, Tony thought it was just a minor nuisance, a distraction. But then the reports started to pile up. Authorities started looking into his financial records, tracing the illegal activities that Maya had carefully exposed. Tony tried to brush it off, but deep down, he knew something was happening that he couldn't control. Maya's name was never mentioned directly in the reports, but the chaos she had orchestrated was undeniable. It wasn't long before the authorities came knocking at Tony's door. Investigators raided his offices, seizing documents, computers, and bank records. The once unshakable mafia boss found himself backed into a corner, unable to escape the fallout from his actions. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Maya's meticulous planning had worked. She had set the wheels in motion, and now Tony was facing the consequences of his own arrogance. As the investigation deepened, Tony began to realize that his world was falling apart. His trusted associates were turning on him, and his allies were distancing themselves. The media frenzy surrounding his downfall was relentless, and the pressure was mounting. But the hardest blow came when the authorities linked him directly to the illegal activities that had once been hidden in the shadows. Tony's carefully crafted empire had been built on lies, and now those lies were being exposed for the world to see. Maya watched from the sidelines as Tony's world crumbled. She had never been in this for revenge. She was in it for justice. The people he had hurt, the lives he had ruined, she was doing this for them. But there was also a personal satisfaction in seeing him brought down. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. The final blow came when Tony was arrested and charged with a series of crimes, from money laundering to illegal trafficking. The case went to court, and as the evidence mounted, it became clear that Tony had no defense. Maya's name was never mentioned directly in the trial, but she knew that it was her work that had brought him down. She had succeeded where so many others had failed. She had taken down a mafia boss without ever raising a fist. As Tony sat in court, facing the consequences of his actions, Maya walked away from it all. She had done what she set out to do, and now she could move on with her life. She had proven that power wasn't about violence or intimidation. It was about knowledge, strategy, and the courage to stand up for what was right. Maya had taken down a mafia boss, not with brute force, but with the truth, and that was the greatest victory of all. Maya sat quietly at her desk, the soft hum of the cafe around her a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. The mission was complete. Tony Russo was no longer a threat, and his empire had crumbled under the weight of his own deceit. For a moment, Maya allowed herself to breathe, to reflect on everything she had done. It was almost surreal. She had taken down a mafia boss without a single act of violence. No one would ever truly know how she had done it, but she knew that her actions would make a difference. The people Tony had harmed, the lives he had shattered, she had helped to restore justice in a way she never thought possible. But it wasn't over. Maya had never been one to rest on her laurels. She was not the kind of person to walk away and forget. Tony's fall was just the beginning of something bigger. Her mind raced with the possibilities. What else could she do? What other wrongs could she right? Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her train of thought. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before opening it, wondering who it could be. When she saw the name, her heart skipped a beat. It was from Detective James Walker, the one who had been leading the investigation into Tony's criminal activities. "Maya, we need to talk. I've come across something that might interest you. Please call me as soon as you can. Her stomach twisted with curiosity. What could the detective have found? Maya quickly dialed his number, her mind already racing with the possibilities. Maya, glad you called, James said on the other end. I've been going over the documents and evidence from Tony's case, and I've stumbled onto something that might just blow the whole thing wide open. There's a bigger operation here, something even more dangerous than we originally thought. I'm going to need your help with this. Maya felt a surge of adrenaline as she processed his words. She had always known that Tony's empire was just a piece of the puzzle, but she hadn't expected it to go this far. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. We're talking about a network, Maya. A group of people with ties to everything from corporate fraud to trafficking. Tony was just one part of it, but his connections go much deeper. I'm still piecing it all together, but I need you to help me understand the financial records. You have a knack for this stuff, and I can't do it alone. Maya paused for a moment, processing the weight of what he was saying. She had taken down Tony Russo, but now she was being asked to go even deeper into a world of danger and corruption. I'm in, she said without hesitation. What do you need me to do? I'll send over the files, James replied. But we need to be careful. If these people find out we're onto them, it won't just be Tony's empire on the line. We're dealing with some serious players here, and they won't hesitate to silence anyone who gets in their way. Maya nodded, even though James couldn't see her. I understand. I'll be ready. After the call ended, Maya sat back in her chair, her heart racing. The stakes had just gotten higher. She wasn't just taking down a mafia boss anymore. She was about to go up against a network of powerful people who had the resources and the willingness to do whatever it took to protect their empire. But Maya wasn't afraid. She had faced adversity before, and each time, she had come out on top. Now, it was time to finish what she had started. She looked at the files that James would send her and knew that the real battle was only just beginning. She wasn't going to back down. She was going to take down the entire network, one piece at a time. With a renewed sense of purpose, Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. The world was full of corruption, injustice, and darkness. But she knew now that she had the power to change it. All she needed was the courage to take the next step. Maya sat at her desk, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop as the files from Detective James Walker poured in. She had expected to find some small details, perhaps a few connections that could lead her to the heart of the criminal network, but what she saw was far worse than anything she had anticipated. The documents were filled with names, numbers, and businesses, small ones, large ones, and everything in between. This wasn't just a criminal syndicate. This was a web of corruption, spanning industries and stretching across borders. Each piece of evidence she uncovered painted a more chilling picture. The connections ran deep, and the people involved were not just criminals. They were influential, powerful, and wealthy. People with ties to government officials, CEOs of multinational corporations, and even influential figures in the media. Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. This was bigger than Tony Russo. She had thought she was putting an end to something that was just a small part of a much larger problem, but now it seemed like the world was connected in ways she had never imagined. The network was vast, and they had the resources to protect themselves, to erase anyone who got in their way. She wasn't just taking on a criminal empire anymore. She was about to go up against some of the most powerful people in the world. Maya wasn't afraid. She had already faced Tony, and now she had the tools to take on something much more dangerous. She had the evidence, and she had the courage to use it. As she sifted through more documents, her fingers shaking slightly, she came across something that caught her eye. A name, one she recognized from her past. A man who had been involved in some of the very dealings that Tony had been running. This man wasn't just a low-level player. He was someone at the top of the chain, someone who had connections to powerful figures in government. Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the person who could lead her to the heart of the operation. The man's name was Gabriel Sinclair, and he was as untouchable as they came. The files showed that he had been involved in multiple illegal activities, including money laundering, human trafficking, and a host of other crimes that spanned decades. But what stood out the most was the sheer amount of money and power he wielded. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a kingmaker. Maya knew that if she could take him down, the entire network would fall. But getting close to him wouldn't be easy. He was protected, surrounded by layers of security and a network of loyal associates who would do anything to keep him safe. Maya needed a plan, and she needed it fast. She leaned back in her chair, thinking. She couldn't do this alone. She needed more help. Her first instinct was to reach out to Detective Walker, but this time, she couldn't afford to trust anyone fully. The people she was up against were too dangerous, and they had eyes everywhere. Maya needed to be careful. Over the next few days, she spent every waking hour studying Gabriel Sinclair's life. She learned about his businesses, his connections, and his weaknesses. There was one thing Maya knew for sure. Sinclair's arrogance was his greatest vulnerability. He thought he was untouchable, and that made him careless. Maya knew that if she could expose him for who he really was, she could destroy everything he had built. But first, she needed to get closer to him. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Maya received an invitation to a gala, one that Gabriel Sinclair himself was hosting. It was an event for the elite, a gathering of business tycoons, politicians, and powerful figures. Maya had no intention of attending as herself. She knew this was her chance to infiltrate Sinclair's world, to get close enough to him to gather the information she needed. She needed to become someone else, someone who could blend in, someone who could slip through the cracks undetected. The night of the gala, Maya stood in front of her mirror, dressed in a sleek black dress that made her look every bit the part of a sophisticated socialite. She had done her research, studying the mannerisms and habits of the guests who would be attending. She wasn't just going to be a bystander at this event. She was going to be a player, one who could move unnoticed through the crowd. When she arrived at the venue, the sight of the grand ballroom took her breath away. The chandeliers sparkled above her, and the hum of hushed conversations filled the air. The room was filled with people who had everything Maya could never dream of: wealth, power, influence. But Maya didn't let the atmosphere intimidate her. She was here to take down the people who thought they were above the law. As she mingled with the guests, she noticed Sinclair standing at the center of the room, surrounded by a group of men and women. He was tall, with sharp features and an air of arrogance that practically radiated off of him. Maya had done her homework. She knew exactly how to approach him. She had learned about his interests, his habits, and even the people he trusted most. She needed to make herself indispensable, someone who could help him in ways no one else could. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, ready to play the part of the confident, wealthy woman she had studied so carefully. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. Maya approached Gabriel Sinclair with a calm confidence, the type that she had spent years perfecting. Her every step was measured, her posture perfect, and her eyes locked onto his with a gaze that suggested she belonged in his world. As she neared him, Gabriel's eyes briefly flickered over her, taking in her appearance. She had done everything to blend in. The sleek black dress, the subtle diamond earrings, and the confident smile that came across as effortless. It was the image of someone who was exactly where they belonged, someone with power, wealth, and influence. Gabriel paused in his conversation with a group of businessmen and turned toward her. His smile was polite, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "And you are?" he asked smoothly, his voice as cool as his demeanor. Maya extended her hand, her grip firm but not overpowering. "Maya Williams," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I couldn't help but overhear that you were discussing some interesting investments. Perhaps I could offer a fresh perspective." Gabriel arched an eyebrow, intrigued but not yet convinced. "Fresh perspective, you say? And what do you bring to the table, Ms. Williams?" His tone was polite, but there was a trace of skepticism. Maya smiled inwardly. She had anticipated his reaction, and she knew exactly how to keep him interested. "I've spent the last few years working in finance, specializing in emerging markets," she replied smoothly. "I've helped several companies expand into regions that others didn't even consider, uncovering opportunities that have turned out to be highly profitable." Gabriel's interest peaked, but he didn't show it outwardly. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, a silent challenge in his gaze. "Go on," he said, his tone giving her a silent invitation to prove herself. Maya took a step closer, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "For example, I've recently identified several under-the-radar assets in the tech sector. Assets that are about to explode in value once the public catches on." She watched as Gabriel's expression shifted, the skepticism fading into curiosity. "And you think I should invest in these assets?" he asked, his voice smooth and calculating. I'm saying that you might already be sitting on some untapped potential, Maya replied, maintaining eye contact. You just need someone who knows how to spot it before everyone else does. I've helped companies make that leap, and I can help you too. There was a pause, a slight flicker of thought crossing Gabriel's face. Maya knew he was weighing her words, deciding whether or not to take her seriously. But she had a plan, and she was confident in its success. Why don't we discuss this further? Gabriel said after a moment, his voice cool, but with an unmistakable note of interest. I'm intrigued, Ms. Williams. Maya smiled politely, nodding. I'd be happy to. As they moved to a quieter corner of the gala, Maya could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Gabriel Sinclair wasn't just a man of wealth and power. He was the key to unlocking the entire network she had been working to expose. His connections were deep, his influence vast, and he had the resources to cover his tracks. But what he didn't know was that Maya had already begun to unravel the truth. She had studied him, watched him closely, and now she was in a position to take him down from the inside. Tell me more about these opportunities, Gabriel said as they settled into a private area of the venue, his tone now more attentive. Maya's voice remained calm, her words measured. I have several ideas on how you can maximize your current investments, but the key is knowing when to move, when to take risks that others won't. That's how you build lasting power in this industry. Gabriel nodded, clearly impressed by her poise and confidence. He leaned in slightly, a gesture that suggested genuine interest. You seem to know this business well. I think we could work together. Maya nodded, maintaining her composure. I believe so. As they talked, Maya's mind raced with the possibilities. She had planned for this meeting, prepared for every angle. But now that she was this close to Gabriel Sinclair, she could feel the weight of what was at stake. She wasn't just trying to take down a mafia boss anymore. She was facing a massive criminal network, and Gabriel was at the center of it all. She knew that if she could gain his trust, if she could get close enough, she would be able to uncover everything. Every secret, every illegal deal. Every person who had been part of this corrupt empire. But she had to be careful. Gabriel Sinclair was a dangerous man, and playing the game with him meant playing it by his rules. What's your take on the current market trends? Gabriel asked, leaning back slightly in his chair, a gesture that suggested he was testing her. Maya didn't hesitate. I think the market is shifting, but not in the way people expect. There are opportunities hidden in plain sight, and it's just a matter of timing. If you act too soon, you risk missing the window. But if you wait too long, you'll be left behind. Gabriel seemed impressed, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. You've got an interesting perspective, Ms. Williams. I think I'll be seeing more of you. Maya smiled inwardly, knowing she had just taken a crucial step toward bringing down everything he had worked to build. This was just the beginning, but she was already one move ahead. And now, with Gabriel Sinclair in her sights, she had the leverage she needed to take the next step. The web of corruption was vast, but Maya was more than ready to unravel it piece by piece. Maya's mind raced as she left the gala, her heart pounding with both excitement and caution. The conversation with Gabriel Sinclair had gone better than she expected. He was intrigued, yes, but more importantly, he hadn't figured out her true intentions. Yet, as she stepped into the cool night air, her phone buzzed. A message from Detective Walker. Meet me tomorrow. Got something big. You won't believe it. Maya's curiosity piqued, but she knew she couldn't afford to rush. She needed to play this game carefully. The next morning, she arrived at the small cafe where she and the detective had agreed to meet. The place was quiet, a perfect setting for discussing delicate matters. Maya scanned the room, her eyes landing on Walker sitting at a corner table. He waved her over as she approached. Morning, he said, his voice low and serious. Have a seat. Maya slid into the chair across from him, her eyes narrowing slightly. What's so urgent? I've been digging into Sinclair, Walker began, pushing a folder toward her. And I think we found something. Maya opened the folder, her eyes scanning the contents. It was filled with financial statements, transaction records, and names. Lots of names. Some were familiar, others not so much. What exactly are we looking at here? She asked, her voice steady. The people who Sinclair has been working with, Walker explained. This is more than just a few shady deals. We're talking about a global operation. He's connected to organizations that operate under the radar, with ties to international crime. But here's the kicker. There's a direct link to several high-ranking government officials. Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was bigger than she had imagined. She had known Sinclair was powerful, but this was something else entirely. How deep does this go? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Deep enough to shake the foundation of several governments, Walker replied grimly. But there's more. Sinclair isn't just involved in illegal activity. He's also using his influence to control financial markets. He's been manipulating stocks, funneling money to shell companies, and orchestrating a web of money laundering that spans continents. This is the kind of operation that could bring down entire economies if it were ever exposed. Maya absorbed his words, her mind racing. The stakes had just gotten much higher. She wasn't just taking on a mafia boss anymore. She was up against a network that could ruin entire systems. What's the next step? She asked, her tone resolute. We need to gather more evidence, Walker replied. And we need to act fast. Sinclair is already aware of the investigation. I'm sure he's making plans to cover his tracks. If we don't move quickly, we could lose everything we've worked for. Maya leaned back in her chair, her mind calculating the risks. She had been through dangerous situations before, but this felt different. Sinclair wasn't just a criminal mastermind. He was playing a game on a global scale, with players she could barely comprehend. I'll help, she said after a moment of silence. But we need a plan. A solid one. Walker nodded, his expression grim. That's why I called you in. You're the only one who knows how to navigate this world. I've got people watching Sinclair, but we need someone who can get close enough to him to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. Maya thought for a moment. Getting close to Sinclair wasn't going to be easy. He was smart, and he didn't trust anyone. But she had already made a connection with him, and now it was time to take it further. I'll need to meet with him again, she said. He trusts me now, but I can't let him know that I'm after him. I'll have to play along. Be careful, Walker warned, his tone sharp. If he catches wind of what you're really doing, it won't just be your life on the line. Maya nodded. She knew the risks, but she also knew the consequences of not acting. Sinclair had to be stopped. She had already come too far to back out now. As she left the cafe, Maya's mind was already working on her next move. She had a plan. She had to. This was bigger than her, bigger than anyone else. The fate of everything she had worked for, everything she believed in, was on the line, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and quiet research. Maya continued her work with Gabriel Sinclair, building trust, getting closer to him with each passing day. She learned more about his operations, his fears, and his weaknesses. She also began to piece together the final details of the criminal network that spanned the globe. Every conversation with Sinclair brought her closer to the heart of the operation, but it also brought her closer to danger. She had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip up, and everything could come crashing down. The tension between them grew with every interaction. Maya knew she was walking a fine line. She was in deeper than she ever expected, and the stakes were higher than ever before. She had one goal, to bring down Gabriel Sinclair and everyone associated with him. But as she moved closer to the truth, she couldn't help but wonder, how far would she have to go to take him down? And what would happen to her once it was all over? Maya sat in her apartment, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her. She had played her cards well, built a relationship with Gabriel Sinclair that was now on the brink of revealing the most dangerous secrets of his criminal empire. Every step she had taken had led her here, to this moment, where the truth was within reach. Yet, the uncertainty of how much further she had to go kept her awake at night. Gabriel was no fool. He was aware that something was off, though he hadn't connected the dots. Maya knew he was playing his own game, a game of manipulation, and she had to stay 3 steps ahead of him. She had to finish what she started. With the new evidence she had gathered from Detective Walker, Maya began to formulate a plan. She would need to get Gabriel to trust her completely, to make him believe that she was fully aligned with him. If she could do that, she could gain access to the most guarded parts of his business. Information that could not only take him down, but dismantle the entire network he was a part of. But Maya knew this wasn't going to be easy. She had already seen the lengths to which Gabriel would go to protect his secrets. Every time she thought she understood him, she realized there was more to uncover. She had to get closer, make him believe she was indispensable. But trust was a dangerous thing, and Maya couldn't afford to get too emotionally involved. The next day, she arrived at one of Gabriel's high-rise office buildings, a sleek structure that overlooked the city. She had arranged to meet him there, under the pretense of discussing new business opportunities. She had been given a rare invitation to sit down with him one-on-one. This was the moment she had been waiting for. As she entered the building's lobby, she was escorted to a private elevator that took her up to the top floor. The elevator doors opened to reveal a panoramic view of the city below, the skyline stretching out like a maze of opportunity and danger. Maya took a deep breath before stepping out into the lavish office. Gabriel was standing near the window, his back to her, as he gazed out at the city. The moment he turned around and saw her, his cold demeanor softened ever so slightly. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice smooth and composed. "I trust you had a pleasant trip up here." Maya nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "It's an impressive view," she said, glancing around the room. "I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard that," Gabriel replied, offering a small smile. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk. As Maya sat down, she could feel the weight of the conversation they were about to have. This was her chance to make Gabriel see her as more than just an outsider, someone who was worthy of his trust. She had to sell the story, make him believe that she was the ally he had been looking for. "I've been reviewing the numbers," Maya began, her voice steady and confident. "I think there's a way to diversify your holdings. Expand into markets that are currently underexploited. With the right strategy, we could see a massive return on investment." Gabriel raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Go on," he said, settling into his chair. Maya leaned forward slightly, her eyes focused on the documents she had brought with her. "I've already made initial contacts in the South American and African markets. Both regions are rich with untapped resources, and the demand for tech products is increasing rapidly. If we move quickly, we can position ourselves as leaders in both areas." Gabriel nodded, considering her words. Maya could see the wheels turning in his mind. She had his attention, but she couldn't stop here. She had to push further. "I've also been looking into some of your current investments," she continued, keeping her tone casual. "There are a few companies that aren't performing as well as they could. A bit of restructuring, strategic partnerships, and we could turn them around." Gabriel's gaze hardened ever so slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "I think it's time to take a few risks," Maya added, her voice low and persuasive. "We need to go after the markets others are too afraid to touch. We need to lead the charge." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Maya could feel the tension in the room. She had no idea how he was going to respond, but she knew that this was the moment of truth. "I like your confidence, Ms. Williams," he said finally, breaking the silence. "But let me make one thing clear." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with hers. "If you're playing me, if you think you can outsmart me, I will not hesitate to end this partnership." Maya held his gaze, her pulse steady. "I'm not here to play games," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm here to win, and I think we both know what's at stake." There was a long pause before Gabriel finally spoke again. "I believe you," he said, his tone cold but calculated. "You've got a sharp mind, Ms. Williams. We'll see how far that takes you." The conversation shifted to more mundane topics, business projections, future growth, but Maya knew she had made her mark. Gabriel Sinclair trusted her, at least for now. As she left his office later that day, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She had gained his trust, but she also knew that she was walking a fine line. One wrong move, one slip up, and she could lose everything. But Maya had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. The game had changed. The real battle was just beginning. Maya walked through the streets of the city, the cool night air wrapping around her like a cloak. The conversation with Gabriel Sinclair had gone better than she had hoped. His trust, though fragile, was hers. But she knew that this was only the beginning of the battle. Gaining his trust was one thing, but getting to the heart of his operation would be another. The files she had from Detective Walker were only the first step. Gabriel was a master manipulator, and Maya had to stay ahead of him at all times. There were too many people involved in this, too many powerful figures that could easily erase her from the equation if she wasn't careful. As she walked, her phone buzzed again, breaking her train of thought. It was another message from Walker. "We've got a lead on Sinclair's financial backers. Meet me tomorrow." Maya felt a surge of urgency. She had to act quickly. Every piece of information she gathered brought her closer to Sinclair, but time was running out. She couldn't afford to waste any more of it. The next day, Maya met Walker in a small, quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. He was already waiting for her, a stack of papers in front of him. She could tell by the way he was tapping his fingers on the table that something important had come up. "What did you find?" Maya asked, sitting down across from him. "I've been digging into Sinclair's investors," Walker said, his voice low. "And I think we found something big." "You were right. He's not just a businessman. He's a front for something much larger." Maya leaned in, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "These backers are part of a global network," Walker continued, handing her a file. "We're talking about connections to international arms deals, money laundering operations, and even some high-level political ties. Sinclair is at the center of it all, pulling the strings." Maya flipped through the file, her eyes scanning the details. The names and organizations listed were not ones she recognized, but the pattern was clear. This wasn't just a criminal syndicate. It was a well-oiled machine that spanned continents. The scale of what she was up against was more than she had ever imagined. "This is bigger than I thought," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Exactly," Walker agreed. "We need to be smart about how we proceed. We can't go public with this yet. Sinclair has too many people in his corner. People who can make us disappear if we're not careful." Maya's mind was already working, the wheels turning as she thought about the next steps. "We need to get closer to Sinclair's inner circle," she said, her voice steady. "If we can expose his backers, we can bring him down from the inside." Walker nodded. "That's the plan. But we need to be careful. Sinclair is already suspicious of you. He's not going to let you get too close without raising some red flags." Maya understood the risks. She had already been walking a fine line, gaining Gabriel's trust while trying to gather the information she needed. But this was a different game now. She wasn't just playing with fire. She was surrounded by it. "I'll do what it takes," she said, her voice firm. "But I need more information. I need to know who his allies are, who's really backing him." "I'll keep digging," Walker replied. "But in the meantime, keep playing the game. Make Sinclair think you're with him." Maya nodded. "I'll be careful." As she left the cafe, her thoughts were consumed with the path ahead. Gabriel Sinclair was a man who had everything: wealth, power, influence. But his empire was built on lies. And Maya was determined to bring it all down. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but she knew there was more to uncover. The stakes had never been higher. And if she didn't act fast, it wouldn't just be her life on the line. It would be everything she had worked for. Over the next few days, Maya continued her careful dance with Gabriel. She maintained the illusion of loyalty, played her part as the ambitious, sharp-eyed businesswoman. But all the while, she was watching him, learning more about his operation, his allies, and his weaknesses. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized how much of a puppet master he truly was. Everything he did, every decision he made, was calculated to keep him in control. But what Gabriel didn't know was that Maya was playing him just as carefully. She had a plan, and she was moving closer to her goal with each passing day. One evening, as they sat together in one of his many high-end restaurants, Maya glanced around the room. The wealthy patrons, the dim lighting, the luxurious decor, it all felt like a carefully crafted facade. "You know," she said, her voice soft but purposeful, "I've always admired how you built your empire. It's impressive how quickly you've climbed to the top." Gabriel smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "It wasn't easy," he replied. "But nothing worth having ever is." Maya took a sip of her wine, her mind already working. "What's your secret, Gabriel?" she asked, her tone just a little too innocent. "How do you manage to stay on top when so many others fail?" Gabriel's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were weighing her question carefully. For a moment, the air between them seemed to thicken, and Maya knew she had hit a nerve. "It's all about control," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Control of the people around you, control of the situation, and knowing when to strike." Maya smiled inwardly. She had what she needed. Gabriel might think he was in control, but Maya was already planning her next move. She would take down his empire from within, piece by piece. All it would take was one final push. And then, everything he had worked for would come crashing down. Maya had spent the last few weeks walking a fine line, balancing between keeping Gabriel Sinclair close and hiding the true nature of her mission. It had been a delicate dance, one that required every ounce of her patience and skill. But now, as she sat in the luxurious penthouse office overlooking the city, the tension in her chest began to ease. She had done everything right. Gabriel trusted her, and his business ventures were becoming more complex with each passing day. It was all coming together. Maya sat across from him, casually discussing his latest expansion plans, but her mind was focused on the next step. She had learned more about the network of people backing him, the hidden connections that tied Sinclair's empire together. She was closer than ever. But there was one piece missing, one person who could expose everything. The key to bringing Gabriel down lay in his business partner, a man named Alexander Crane. Alexander was someone who had kept to the shadows, always working behind the scenes, but his influence was undeniable. Maya had never met him in person, but the more she dug into Sinclair's dealings, the more she realized that Crane was the real power behind the scenes. It wasn't enough to expose Gabriel. Maya needed to get to Crane. She had to make sure that the network fell apart, piece by piece, and that meant taking down the person who was truly pulling the strings. It was a risk, but it was one Maya was willing to take. She knew she had to get close to Alexander, just as she had gotten close to Gabriel. The more she observed Sinclair's operations, the more she realized that Crane was always a step ahead. He never appeared in public, always working through intermediaries. But Maya knew one thing. No one stayed hidden forever. She would find a way in. A few days later, Maya received an invitation to a private meeting. The sender was none other than Alexander Crane. The message was brief, but its implications were clear. He wanted to meet. It was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Maya knew this was the break she had been waiting for. She spent the next few days preparing for the meeting. She studied Crane's business practices, his public dealings, and any information she could gather from her connections. Everything she had learned about him pointed to one thing. He was smart, ruthless, and careful. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The meeting was scheduled at one of the most exclusive locations in the city, a private club that only the elite could access. Maya arrived early, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. She was about to meet the man who could bring down everything Sinclair had worked for. She couldn't let her nerves show. When she walked into the club, she felt the eyes of the room on her. It wasn't the kind of attention she was used to, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. She had a job to do. Alexander Crane was sitting at a table in the back, surrounded by a few trusted associates. He was older than she had expected, with sharp features and an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He didn't look up when she approached, but his eyes briefly flicked to her as she sat down across from him. "Ms. Williams," Crane said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "I've been hearing a lot about you." Maya met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I hope it's all good," she replied, her voice steady. Crane chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "For now it is. But I'm curious, Ms. Williams. What is it you want from me?" Maya kept her gaze locked with his, refusing to show any hint of doubt. "I'm not looking for anything from you," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm here to offer you something." Crane raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Go on," he said, his tone no longer dismissive but interested. "You're running a business, a very successful one. But I think there's potential for more," Maya continued, keeping her voice calm. "You've been operating in the shadows, behind Sinclair's back, but that's not sustainable. The world is changing, and if you want to stay ahead, you need someone who understands how to play the game in the open." Crane studied her for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "And you think that's you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maya nodded slowly, her expression unwavering. "I think I can help you build something bigger than what you've been doing. I know how to get people to trust you, to believe in your vision. I can make you a name that people won't forget." Crane leaned forward, his interest now fully piqued. "What's the catch?" he asked, his tone no longer playful. Maya smiled inwardly. "No catch. Just an opportunity. I can help you get to the next level, but you have to trust me. And, of course, I'll expect a partnership." There was a long pause, the silence hanging between them. Maya could feel the weight of the moment. This was the gamble. She was offering herself as an ally. But if Crane saw through her, it could all fall apart. But she knew she had the skills to pull this off. Finally, Crane spoke. "You're bold, I'll give you that," he said, his voice low. "But trust is something that's hard to come by in my line of work. I don't just hand out favors." "I'm not asking for a favor," Maya replied. I'm asking for a chance. Let me show you what I can do. Crane leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, Maya thought he might turn her down, but then he surprised her. All right, he said. You have one shot. Impress me. Maya nodded, her heart racing. This was it. She had made her move, and now she had to make it count. As they talked more about the details of their potential partnership, Maya's mind was already working on her next steps. She had gained Crane's interest, and with it, a chance to expose everything Sinclair had built. She couldn't afford to let up now. Every moment brought her closer to the truth, closer to bringing down the network that had ruled for so long. Gabriel Sinclair, Alexander Crane, they were just the beginning. Maya was determined to tear down everything they had built, and she was willing to go as far as she needed to make sure it happened. Maya sat across from Alexander Crane, her heart pounding in her chest. She had played the game so well so far, but now, sitting here with him, she knew the stakes were higher than ever. He had agreed to her proposal, the one that would put her in the perfect position to take down the empire he had built with Gabriel Sinclair. She had his attention, and now she needed to follow through. Crane's cold, calculating gaze never wavered as they discussed potential partnerships, his voice smooth but guarded. You know, he said, his tone measured, I'm not one to rush into deals. But your proposal intrigues me. I've seen how you've handled Sinclair. You have a certain finesse. Maya smiled inwardly, keeping her face neutral. She couldn't afford to let him see any hint of pride. She knew how dangerous this game was. Thank you, she said simply. I believe we could make a significant impact together. But we have to think big. If we are going to do this, it needs to be a power move. A partnership that shifts the balance. Crane leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. A power move, you say, he mused. What exactly do you have in mind? Maya took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment she had been preparing for. We need to cut Sinclair out of the picture completely, she said, her voice calm but resolute. He's the front. He's the distraction. The real power lies behind the scenes, with you. Crane's expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. And you think I can just push him aside? He asked, his voice quiet but laced with challenge. Sinclair has been my partner for years. Maya nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. You don't need him, she said. You've built an empire. You've made your mark. Sinclair is simply the face of it all. Without him, you can rise even higher. Crane was silent for a moment, clearly weighing her words. Maya held her breath, waiting for his response. She couldn't afford to be wrong. This was the moment that would determine everything. Finally, Crane spoke. You're bold, Ms. Williams, he said, his tone softer now, almost amused. I'll give you that. Maya didn't flinch. She had to stay calm, stay focused. I'm not just bold, she replied. I'm right. You can make this transition seamless. Sinclair's influence is waning, and with the right push, you'll have everything. It's time to let go of the dead weight. Crane chuckled softly, though there was no humor in his eyes. You think I'm some kind of puppet master? He asked, his voice low. I didn't get to where I am by playing second fiddle. No, you didn't, Maya said, her voice steady. But you're not playing second fiddle now. You're taking control. You'll take Sinclair's place. You'll be the one everyone answers to. The empire will be yours. Crane's eyes narrowed as he studied her. The silence stretched between them, but Maya didn't look away. She had worked too hard to back down now. Finally, Crane spoke, his voice softer, but carrying an air of finality. All right, he said. I'll play along. But this better not be a game. I don't play for second place. Maya nodded, relief flooding through her, but she kept her face impassive. I understand. And I'll make sure that this is more than just a game. I'll make sure you win. As Crane stood to leave, Maya felt the weight of what she had just accomplished. She had earned his trust, and now the real work began. She wasn't just working with him to bring down Sinclair's empire. She was working to take control of it herself. The power was shifting, and it was shifting into her hands. As she left the meeting, Maya's mind was already racing. She had gained Crane's confidence, but she knew she couldn't let her guard down. She had to be careful. One wrong move, one hint of weakness, and everything could come crashing down. But Maya wasn't afraid. She had already taken down Tony Russo. She had already outsmarted Gabriel Sinclair. Now, she was ready to take on the biggest challenge yet, exposing Crane for the criminal mastermind he truly was, while taking control of his empire for herself. Over the next few weeks, Maya carefully maneuvered, gathering information and laying the groundwork for her plan. She continued to meet with Crane, keeping him close, learning more about his operations. She had to be patient. This wasn't going to be an overnight victory. But with each passing day, she knew she was getting closer. Gabriel Sinclair was no longer the biggest threat. It was Alexander Crane. He was the one she needed to bring down. And she was going to do it from the inside. She had already gathered all the necessary pieces, but now she needed the right moment to strike. She wasn't going to take any chances. She would bide her time, wait for the perfect opportunity, and then, when the time was right, she would expose Crane for everything he was. Maya knew that this was the final battle, the one that would determine everything. But she was ready. She had come this far, and now she was going to finish what she had started. The game was on, and she was playing to win. Maya sat in her apartment, the weight of her next move heavy on her shoulders. The plan she had been carefully crafting for weeks was finally coming to fruition. She had played her role well, gaining Gabriel Sinclair's trust and positioning herself closer to the powerful Alexander Crane. But now, everything hinged on her next decision. She knew that exposing Crane and taking down his empire was no small feat. He was smart, methodical, and far more dangerous than she had initially realized. His web of influence stretched across multiple industries, and every step she took brought her closer to a monumental shift in the criminal network she had been infiltrating. Maya had already seen how Gabriel was starting to lose control, his attention diverted as his empire crumbled around him. But Crane, the silent puppet master, was still in full command. She had to move quickly, but carefully. Any misstep could cost her everything. The next day, Maya received a call from an unknown number. It was a voice she recognized, but one she hadn't heard in weeks. It was Detective Walker. "Maya, I've got news." His voice crackled through the phone. "We've uncovered more on Crane. It's bigger than we thought. We need to meet." Maya's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She knew that the detective had access to critical information that could provide her with the final pieces to dismantle Crane's operation. She agreed to meet him immediately. The meeting place was a quiet diner on the outskirts of town, a place where no one would think to look. As she entered, she spotted Walker in a booth at the back, his eyes scanning the room. She approached cautiously and slid into the seat across from him. "What did you find?" Maya asked, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. Walker didn't hesitate. He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table to her. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "We've traced Crane's connections to a series of offshore accounts, laundering money on a global scale. But here's the kicker. He's been using those funds to finance operations across multiple continents. Arms dealing, illegal trades, you name it." Maya's eyes widened as she flipped through the documents, each page more damning than the last. The amount of money flowing through these accounts was staggering. Crane had built a financial empire, one that was almost untouchable. "What's the plan?" Maya asked, her voice tight with focus. "We can't go public with this just yet," Walker said, his tone serious. "Crane has too many connections, too much influence. If we make one wrong move, we risk exposing everything. But we have a way in. There's a meeting scheduled for tomorrow, a big one. If we can get you close to Crane, you'll have everything we need." Maya's mind was already working. This was it. This was her opportunity to take the final step. She had already built a relationship with Crane, but now she needed to gain access to his most intimate dealings. "How do we get in?" she asked. "I'll get you a seat at the table," Walker said. "But it's risky. You'll have to play the part, Maya. Get close to Crane, get him to trust you even more. Use everything you've learned. But whatever you do, don't raise any suspicion." Maya nodded. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do this." The next day, she found herself once again in the midst of high-profile individuals, the room buzzing with business deals and whispered conversations. The meeting was being held at one of Crane's private properties, a lavish estate that only the most trusted associates were allowed into. Maya had never been to this part of town before, but she had prepared herself for this moment. She had studied every detail of the event, from the guest list to the private security details. As she entered the estate, she felt a rush of adrenaline. She had already gained Crane's trust, but now she had to solidify her position. She couldn't afford to slip up. The meeting was being held in a massive conference room, surrounded by large windows that overlooked the city. Crane was already there, standing at the head of the table, his sharp gaze scanning the room as the others took their seats. Maya joined the group, offering a nod to the few familiar faces. She was careful not to draw too much attention to herself, but she could feel Crane's eyes on her. He didn't trust easily, but he had allowed her into this circle. She had to prove she belonged. As the meeting began, Maya kept her focus, listening carefully to every word exchanged. Deals were being discussed, but Maya knew that the real conversation would happen in the moments when everyone else was distracted. She needed to get close to Crane, to see if she could extract the final pieces of information that would destroy his empire. After hours of discussion, the meeting began to wind down. Maya had learned more than she had expected, but she knew the most important moment had yet to come. As people began to leave, Crane stood and made his way to a smaller, more private room. Maya seized her chance. She excused herself from the group and followed Crane, slipping past the security guards with practiced ease. She was so close now. This was the moment that would define everything. As she entered the private room, Crane was standing by the window, his back to her. He turned slowly as she approached, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said, his voice low. "You've been following me for a while now, haven't you?" Maya met his gaze, her voice calm. "I've been trying to understand how you've built such an empire," she said, her tone deliberate. "You're a master at what you do, Alexander." Crane studied her for a moment, a flicker of something in his eyes. "I'm not the only one playing this game," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm the one who wins." Maya smiled inwardly, knowing she had him exactly where she wanted him. "Then let's make sure you keep winning," she said, her voice steady. She had gained his trust, but now she had to ensure that everything she had worked for would pay off. She was closer than ever to bringing him down, and she would stop at nothing to see it through. Maya stood there, feeling the weight of the moment pressing in on her. Alexander Crane's words lingered in the air, the tension between them palpable. "Then let's make sure you keep winning," she had said. And now, the game was hers to control. She had carefully positioned herself in Crane's world, moving with precision, gaining his trust, and now, she was about to execute the final phase of her plan. She had learned everything she needed to know. Gabriel Sinclair was a distraction, a pawn in a much larger game, but Crane, he was the mastermind. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Her mission was no longer just about taking down Sinclair. It was about unraveling the entire network that Crane had built. She could feel the shift in the air as Crane turned to face her, his gaze sharp and calculating. He had always been aware that someone was watching, someone was after him, but he had never expected it to be her. "You're playing a dangerous game, Maya," Crane said, his voice low and steady. Maya met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I'm not the one who's playing," she said. "I'm here to win." There was a flicker of something in his eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual cold, composed demeanor. He wasn't fool enough to think she was just another player in his world. He had underestimated her once, but now he was starting to see just how far she had gone. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken truths, but Maya didn't flinch. She couldn't. "What's the next step?" she asked, her voice calm, calculated. "You want to take over," Crane said, a knowing edge in his voice. "You've been trying to do this from the beginning, haven't you?" Maya didn't respond immediately, but her silence spoke volumes. She had been playing the long game, and now it was time to act. "I'm not here to take over," she said, her tone deliberate. "I'm here to end this." Crane leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing, as if weighing her words. "You think you can bring me down?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Maya took a slow, measured breath. "I don't think," she said, her voice unwavering. "I know." There was a long pause as Crane processed her words. Maya watched him carefully, every muscle in her body poised for the next move. He had been the one in control for so long, but now he was no longer the one pulling the strings. The power was shifting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Crane's expression changed. He knew what was coming. He could feel the walls closing in. "You've been playing me," he said, a trace of disbelief in his voice. Maya didn't flinch. "No," she said, her voice steady. "You've been playing everyone else. I just made sure you didn't win." She could see the realization dawning in his eyes, the moment he understood that the game was over. For a brief second, she almost saw respect in his gaze, before it was quickly replaced by the coldness that had always defined him. "You've been too careful, Maya," Crane said, his voice almost calm now. "But you can't control everything." Maya stepped closer to him, her expression fierce. "I don't need to control everything," she said, her voice low. "I just need to make sure you lose." Crane stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The tension in the room had reached its peak, but Maya didn't move. She was in control now, and she wasn't going to back down. "You'll regret this," Crane said, his voice dripping with contempt. Maya smiled, the edges of her lips curling into a slight, but confident, grin. "I don't think so," she said. "But I'm willing to let you think that for a while." Crane turned to leave, but Maya stopped him with a single word. "Not so fast." He froze, his back still turned to her. She could feel the power shift in the room, the final moment before everything came crashing down. "You thought you could control everything," Maya continued, her voice cold. "But in the end, it was all about trust. And you never trusted me." With those words, she took a step back and pulled out the file she had been waiting to present. The information inside was enough to take down not just Crane, but the entire network he had built. The documents were damning: accounts, names, transactions. All the evidence she needed to destroy his empire. "This is how it ends," she said, her voice steady, as she placed the file on the table in front of him. "You thought you were untouchable, but you were wrong." Crane turned around slowly, his expression now one of shock, as he realized what she had done. He had been outplayed. The realization hit him like a freight train, and in that moment, he knew there was nothing he could do to stop the tide of destruction that was coming for him. The empire he had built was collapsing, and there was no one left to save him. Maya had won. "You don't have to do this," Crane said, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. Maya shook her head, her eyes locked on his. "It's already done," she said. "You've lost." As Crane stood there, speechless, Maya turned and walked away, her steps steady and confident. She had taken down the empire. She had outsmarted the puppet master. And now, as she walked out of the room, she knew that she had done what no one thought possible. She had won, and the world would never be the same. Maya sat in her car, the engine humming quietly as she stared out the windshield at the city skyline. The world around her had shifted in the past few days. An empire that had seemed indestructible was now in ruins. The documents she had exposed, the networks she had carefully dismantled, had all led to this moment. She had done it. Gabriel Sinclair's empire had crumbled, and Alexander Crane's network had been torn apart piece by piece. But now, as she reflected on her journey, she realized that the battle wasn't truly over. She had won, yes, but at what cost? She thought about the people she had met along the way, the ones who had become part of her world. Some of them had been allies, others had been pawns, and some, like Walker, had been her lifeline in the chaos. But in the end, it had been her decision, her choices, that had led to the downfall of the most dangerous criminal network the city had ever seen. And now, she stood alone. The phone in her hand buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Walker. "It's over. They're done. We've got all the evidence we need." Maya sighed, a small but satisfied smile tugging at her lips. The weight that had been pressing on her for so long was finally lifting. The truth had been exposed, and those who had been hiding in the shadows could no longer escape. She typed back quickly, "Good work. I'll be in touch." She sat back in her seat, allowing herself a moment of peace. The city stretched out before her, the lights twinkling in the distance like stars. She had taken down the men who thought they were invincible, the ones who had manipulated the system for their own gain. And now, the world was different. But the fight for justice wasn't over. It never was. As Maya drove through the streets, her mind began to wander to the future. What came next? She had accomplished everything she had set out to do, but there was still more to be done. There were always more corrupt systems to dismantle, more people to protect, and more secrets to expose. Maya knew she couldn't stop now. She wasn't the same person who had walked into Gabriel's world months ago. She had grown, adapted, and learned from the battles she had fought. The city needed someone who wasn't afraid to stand up, who wasn't afraid to take on the powerful, the corrupt, the ones who thought they were untouchable. And Maya was ready to be that person. She didn't need to be a part of their world anymore. She had built her own. And as she turned down a familiar street, A new sense of purpose filled her. This was her city now. It wasn't about taking down the biggest criminals. It was about keeping the balance, making sure that the scales of justice were never tipped too far. Maya knew that as long as there were people like Gabriel and Crane in the world, there would always be more work to do. But she wasn't afraid. She had already taken down the most dangerous empire in the city. Now, she was ready for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. Maya hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Maya Williams," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I have a job for you." The voice on the other end said, a hint of intrigue in its tone. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Who is this?" she asked. "Someone who needs your help," the voice replied. "You've made quite a name for yourself. And now, I think it's time you took on something bigger." Maya leaned back in her seat, considering the offer. She had already brought down the biggest criminals in the city, but the idea of something bigger intrigued her. "What are you offering?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I'm offering you the chance to change everything," the voice replied. "There's a new empire rising, and I need someone who isn't afraid to tear it down." Maya's mind raced. She had already exposed the most dangerous players in the game. But a new empire? A new challenge? This was exactly the kind of thing she had been waiting for. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. It never was. But she had proven time and again that she could handle whatever came her way. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady. The game was never over. And Maya Williams was ready for whatever came next.